Today I want to give you a few tips that will help you to shoot better video with your smartphone. Now, it's mostly going to be about this type of shooting where we're doing what we call a talking head style video, and I'm talking directly to the camera. The camera is mostly just sitting still and pointed at me and not moving around a lot. Some of these tips could apply across the board to maybe more of a vlogging style or even epic B-roll, as they say, that kind of thing. Things that you can just kind of keep in mind. But generally speaking, I'm really talking about this type of talking head style video and what you can do to improve that. So the first thing I want to talk about is that of framing and the camera's orientation. So with a smartphone, it's really tempting to just always hold it in this sort of portrait or vertical style because it feels natural and it's kind of natural to look at it that way, but it's not really that great for video because our eyes go this way and not this way on our face, right? And we have a bit more peripheral vision to the sides than we do up and down, and we experience the world a little bit more with that panoramic type of view. So with that in mind, we can think, if you go to a movie, you don't really watch movies, I can't even imagine sitting through a 2-hour movie that was taller than it was wide. That's very strange to even think about. It'd be like watching all this stuff go on through a closet door or something. So with that in mind, we want to shoot things that are really going to be more viewable, and therefore widescreen is usually better. Now there will be some specific times when there's exceptions to that, like Instagram stories and some of the other platforms that really kind of support vertical video. But for the most part, we'll generally prefer the widescreen, and especially if this video that you shoot with your phone has to be integrated with other video that was maybe shot on a proper video camera, then we really kind of need to cover that widescreen format. Now, it's not the end of the world if you shoot something in portrait mode and it has to be put into a widescreen video. You can always put that in there. If you don't do anything to it, you'll see those two black bars on either side, and it's kind of looks small because it has to be squeezed down to the maximum height of the widescreen video. But if you are the one editing your video, you could always kind of just blow a version of that up and blur it out in the background. There's some plugins that'll do this automatically for you, but even if you have to do it manually, it's not impossible or anything. It's fairly easy to do. But generally speaking, it will be better just to start out shooting it with the right orientation in the first place. So try to remember that. Try to remember to start your recording with the camera and your phone already in the correct orientation. Okay, so now the next thing I would say about that is that when we shoot in a wide screen, we need to remember that that's the thing. We're including more of our environment in the shot. So one of the reasons it's tempting, aside from just the comfort of holding your phone this way, it's also tempting to shoot in a portrait orientation because a lot of times as the person shooting, we might be very focused on the subject, which is quite often a person, and therefore people are usually taller than they are wide, and if they're healthy anyway. So with that in mind, we tend to shoot and frame them up, but that ignores the context of their environment, and it makes it where you don't really feel the same visual story that you do if you have their environment in there with them. So again, better to shoot with the widescreen. Now, the thing to consider then is that now we're including the environment, so we have to be aware of what's in the environment. So we don't want too many things that are distracting. So like in this particular scene that I have here, most of what you see in this scene are things that are somewhat relevant to me doing videos, and it's sort of a little quasi home studio sort of environment. You see a little bit of the stuff in the peripheral, but besides that, it's generally, I try to keep it from being too cluttery. There's a few things, but nothing terribly distracting, hopefully. And my, scene here there's not anything throwing me way out of balance. I'm sort of on a bit of a third here, but there's weight on this side to counter that. So you have to think about the composition a little bit so that things look right. With that in mind, the next thing we want to think about is the angle of view as far as like how high or low. So if the camera is generally at your face level, it's sort of a pretty stable situation, and it feels like it's kind of natural because you're sort of right at more or less eye level with the person that's speaking. But if you're speaking and you want yourself to appear a bit more stronger and authoritative, maybe you lower the camera so it's looking up at you and you appear to be a more strong presence. If you want to diminish your appearance or seem maybe softer or friendlier, you could raise it a little bit. So you consider those things and they make a big impression. Now remember, if you go too far in one way or the other, it can really have a dramatic and strange effect, a little bit unpleasant effect on the video. A lot of times I see people shooting from far too low of an angle because they just happen to sit their phone on a desk or something and it's just angled up their nose. So we want to try to avoid those extreme angles unless we just got some extreme impression that we want to get across. Okay, so then the next thing that we want to think about is the environment, besides just whether it's cluttery or not, but how well is it lit? Like in this case, I've got a window behind me, and this window could potentially blow out, just be way too bright. But right now it's sort of late in the day and it's not too extreme, so I've left the window open for a little bit of green color in here. But we want to be careful to have more light on the subject than behind it. So in this case, I actually have video lights on me right now, so it helps to light me properly. Now I'm going to switch over to my phone in this view so that we can see that this still also has the same effect basically. It'll look a little different because the camera on the phone is good, but it's not nearly as good as what I'm shooting with right now. But we will see that these general principles about the lights being more in front than behind, how it applies. Okay, now I've switched over to my iPhone XR, so I'm actually using my own smartphone now that I talked about the orientation of the phone and everything. And I have it set up, it's sort of in an approximation of where my camera was at the first part of this video. Now, the thing I want to talk about now is lighting, and with the lights, we really want to make sure that our subject is well lit. And with a smartphone, it's going to be hard to do a lot of real tricked out lighting setups and really just kind of masterfully control all that stuff the same way that you might with a regular camera, where you can really deep dive into controlling your exposure settings a little easier and so forth. But with a camera that's on a smartphone, we just kind of play it safe and basically consider lighting your subject the best. So whatever exposure really makes it where you can really see, I don't want to get into too many technical terms, but just where you can really see your subject well, and maybe consider having your background not overly lit. So in this case, I do have the window open back here, but it's late in the day, so there's not a huge amount of light coming from back there. And I have a little bit of a backlighting and a little bit of a light on the wall back there, but that's all very well damped down and controlled and less than what's being put on me by the key light that's in front. So we certainly want to consider that as a very important part of this, because iPhones and smartphones in general don't really have a lot of what's referred to as dynamic range, where you can really get a lot of information out of the darker parts of the image versus the lighter parts. And if things are too bright or too dark, you just kind of lose the information. So we want to try to help it by getting things lit the best we can. Now, outdoors can be fantastic as long as you put yourself in a really good spot and you don't have too much light behind you. So you don't want the sun in the frame behind you if you expect to be able to see your face, okay? So try to remember that. And if the light is really harsh, like midday, the shadows will be extreme. You'll probably be squinting even if you're not looking directly into the sun. So you might want to find a shady place to shoot your video if you're going to do that. Now, you also want to consider noise and things like that. So we want to make sure if you're outside that you don't have a lot of dogs barking or you know, just things, extraneous noise creeping in and interfering with the video. So we want to try to think about that too, not just the light. Okay, now you could also use the sunlight that comes through a window if you're shooting indoors. And a lot of times that's a great way to get a real nice soft light on you if you position yourself such that, let's say that the sun was coming through the window from this angle right here. It could be really nice if the sun isn't just blasting, if it's just sort of softly coming through and casting that light onto me and just lighting me up in a real smooth sort of way. And that's really what I'm imitating with my video light right now. It's just a real large soft source that's hitting me and not casting too many hard shadows. So we could get that from a window light. We just have to be careful to not place ourselves in such a way that the window is really just making us a silhouette. We want that light on the face, not behind us, okay? So be aware of that. Now the next thing I want to get to is whether you use your selfie camera or the main camera. Now I know it's really tempting to always use the selfie camera, and sometimes you might not have a choice because you just don't have any other way to see the image. So if you really need to record yourself and nobody else can operate the camera for you, then you kind of have to flip it around so that you can see yourself on the screen. But remember that that camera that faces on the selfie direction on your phone is generally not as good as the main camera that points the other way. So you won't really have as much of a sharp and high resolution image to deal with. But if you have to, use that selfie camera to shoot. Now something I've noticed though is that's really common is that when people are using the selfie camera on their phone, they tend to look at the screen, they look at themselves talk rather than at the lens. And that way, when you look back at the video or you're watching someone who's done that, it looks like they're looking past you and never really looking at you while they're talking to you. So it's almost like they can't really, you just get a disconnect because they're not looking at you directly. So try to remember that even if you're using your selfie camera, try to look at the lens when you talk and not at your own image on the screen. Use that screen to help you get your composition and to decide where you need to be in the frame. But once you start talking, look at the lens so that it looks like you're talking to the person that you're trying to address in the video. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is sound. Okay, now how you record the sound will make a huge difference. And with a phone, generally you have to put the phone back a little ways so you can talk to the camera and everything. And the further you get away, the worse the sound gets. So you might consider using an external microphone like what I'm doing right now. I'm using a little Rode lavalier mic that's actually going into my phone, and that way it gives me a lot better sound. It's a lot warmer and fuller on the voice. And since my speaking is coming from a source that's very close to the mic, any other noises in the room are a lot less in relationship to that. So it seems much quieter, and I don't have to worry about how offensive the room sound might be. Okay, so that could help you out, especially if you're in a room that has reflective surfaces like a hardwood floor or something like that. Consider having an external mic that you can get close to you while you talk and not have to just rely on what's in the phone. Now, that's kind of a deep subject to get into about which mic to use and all that, so I'll just kind of leave that for now, but just consider that. It'll make a big difference, and sound is half of video. As a matter of fact, it's the better half, because most people would rather watch a video that looks bad but sounds good than the other way around. If a video sounds bad, it's just hard to tolerate. So always remember that sound is very important, so make sure you get a good recording of your voice. Now, if you can't use an external microphone, or you have to use a mic that's mounted directly to your camera, then maybe just consider trying to get as close as you can and try to get in a room or an environment that doesn't have too many hard reflective surfaces where you hear that real sharp kind of echoey reflection sound in the audio. Now, if you're going to consider using an external microphone to improve your recording, you could do a lavalier mic like the one I'm using, which is really handy if I need to move around. It doesn't really change how things sound. And I could get up and walk around in the frame or whatever, do things with my hands. But if I want to just kind of stay in one place and really zero in on one particular spot, then sometimes the very best thing to do is to use a microphone that's just mounted on a stand. It could be a shotgun mic or something like that, like a Rode Video Mic Pro or something like that. So a couple of different possibilities. Lavaliers, though, do give you a lot of freedom for movement in the frame, so you might want to consider that. Okay, so the next tip is sort of a general thing, but try to shoot things with the end result and with how you might have to edit your video in mind. So one of the most important things is to try to make sure that you give yourself a little bit of time before you start talking. So hit record, start talking a few seconds later so that you can trim that. But if you start talking too soon, you just don't leave yourself any way to transition in without it being really abrupt or even cutting off words or something like that. And the same thing holds true for the ending. Let the recording go for a few seconds after your last words so that you have some room to decide what you want to do with that transition, and you don't take chances with cutting off any of your information or the words that you speak. Now, before hitting record, make sure that you think about what's going on in your environment, maybe even do a little test run of recording and just see how things look and sound. Look for things that are distracting and problem causing in the video, like bad lights or things that you didn't notice in the background when you're first setting up, or dogs barking or kids running around or anything like that. Just things that might distract your viewer. So there are a lot of things that we can tune out in our own home or our own environment that the person watching the video is not really so comfortable doing that, because this isn't their environment. So you need to present them with the most easy to experience environment possible. So just consider things, how do you want things to land on the person, and don't expect the person viewing to have to tune things out or to look around things and ignore things that are in the frame and so forth. So just consider all of that stuff, and it'll make your videos much better and easier to edit in the process. All right, now if you want a little bit more control than your phone will give you right out of the box, you might consider shooting with a third-party app. Like what I'm doing right now, I'm using an app called Filmic Pro, which enables me to get in and kind of control my shutter speed and my frame rates and things like that a little more specifically, just like I would on my camera. And it really helps because I'm going to put this footage together in this video with stuff that was shot on my regular camera, so it really helps put the two together and make it work out. And even if I wasn't doing that, I would want to use this because it helps me to make the exposure just like I want it. I'm not depending on the camera to just, or the software that's in the phone to make those decisions for me, because sometimes it decides something I don't want, or I might want a specific look or a specific control over the audio that I can't get with the automatic settings that are in the phone software. So just consider that. There are a lot of different ones. I'm using Filmic Pro, like I said, but there are a lot of different ones out there. And also, like in this case, I'm able to use the main camera on my phone while I'm recording and still monitor the image, because Filmic Pro has a remote app that I'm actually able to run at this very moment on my iPad, so I can see what I'm recording, and I can see that the camera is indeed recording. I can monitor my audio levels and all kinds of things while I'm doing this, even though I can't see the screen on the iPhone because it's turned the other way while I'm using the main camera. So just something else to consider there is that a third-party app like that could help open up some of the possibilities creatively and just functionally for you with your smartphone camera. Okay, so the next tip is just to look into the possibility of accessories that could help you shoot better with your phone. So if we think of the phone like a camera, then one of the first things that comes to mind would be a tripod of some kind and some mounting solution for your phone. So in this case, I've got a little small Manfrotto sort of quasi-fluid head tripod here that you can pan and tilt and all that kind of stuff with smoothly. Normally use it for a small camera, but in this case I've got my phone mounted with this little clamp. So I've got a quick release on here. This is sort of an extra accessory, but it's kind of convenient to have it. But the clamp itself is just a spring-loaded clamp that's designed to hold a smartphone, and you could turn it to portrait even if you wanted to. But in this case, I can just kind of turn it however I want, clamp it down, and I could, orient this thing in such a way that I could use easily access either of the cameras, the front or back facing camera. I could adjust the angle really easily on the clamp itself. There's a lot of ease of use with this, and then once it's set, you have a nice stable angle of view, and you could, with a good tripod like this, you can just set it up in almost any kind of conditions, adjust the legs even if you're on uneven ground or anything like that. So really kind of a must-have, I think, if you shoot a lot of video. You got to have a mounting solution that you can depend on. So the next thing is, if you are moving around and doing maybe more of a vlog style where you're holding the camera or phone out and talking to it as you walk around, you might consider a stabilization device like a little gimbal, DJI Osmo or something comparable to that, could help smooth out your footage and make it much easier to view, easier for the viewer to tolerate it, and the movement would be smoother and much nicer. Okay, the last accessory I'll mention right now would be the possibility of adding specialty lenses. There's a company called Moment and probably a few others that make nice little lenses you can add to your camera or your smartphone camera, and it will sort of augment or help embellish what what your smartphone's angle of view is and give you a different look. So maybe a tighter field of view or a wider field of view and so on. So those are a possibility if you really want to increase the angle of view possibilities with your smartphone camera. Now, having said that, I would say there's sort of a limit to how far you might want to go with this before you start considering and just investing in a proper camera. So I think that's important too, is this maybe think in terms of what's the future of what you want to do. And there's just so much more creative control over a proper or designated video camera of some kind, like a hybrid camera. It could be like a mirrorless or DSLR style camera that shoots video. It could be a camcorder for that matter. Just depends on what your needs are. But I would say maybe just be aware of where you're wanting to go with what you're shooting before you invest too much money in gadgetry for a smartphone specifically. Now, in the case of this mounting solution here, this little thing was only like, I don't even remember, probably 10 or 15 bucks. The rest of this is, much more than that, but this is stuff that I can use with my real cameras. So this wasn't just an investment in the smartphone. And the same would be true of, say, an external microphone or something like that. Generally speaking, you could use your external microphone with a camera if you decided to upgrade later. So some accessories would be good and helpful for your smartphone, but they're not specifically just for shooting with a smartphone. So maybe keep that in mind when you spend money on ways to improve your shooting, is think long term, what would this actually help me out with in the future, or is it just for this particular smartphone that I'm using, and will that just not be worth anything once I move on to something else, or even upgrade my phone for that matter. So always be aware of that and make wise decisions with what you spend your money on. All right, I hope these tips were helpful for you, and if you've got anything that you'd like to add that might be helpful for someone else, please drop that into the comments below. If you've got a question, drop that too. I try to answer everything that anybody asks on here. And if you like this video and want to see more things like this, click like, subscribe, and I will see you next time.